So here is a half square triangle. This is an awesome unit for quilting because you never actually work with a triangle shape. Instead, you piece this unit off of 2 squares. So for every 2 squares you stitch, you're going to end up with 2 half square triangles. So the first thing you want to do is take your fabrics, flip over one of the squares so it is right side down, place a ruler corner to corner, and mark a nice line on the back side. Okay, so now we're going to take these 2 squares and layer them right sides together, just like so. We're going to take this to the machine and we're going to stitch a 1/4 inch to both sides of that marked diagonal line. So here at my machine, I have a straight stitch selected and I have lowered my stitch length to 1.5 millimeters. And I'm going to grab a little scrap of fabric. This is just about 2 inches of fabric folded in half. This is my scrap charger. What I use this for is just to get the machine started stitching, so that way if it gags, if the thread breaks or does something freaky, it's going to happen on that little scrap rather than on my half square triangles. Clip those thread tails off. And now I can grab my squares. I'm just making sure that these pieces are in nice alignment all the way across that corner. And now I'm going to slip it underneath the foot. And I'm lining up the edge of this foot with that line. I am using a 1/4 inch patchwork foot here. And that foot is special. It gives me exactly a 1/4 inch from the edge of the foot to the needle. So I can always line things up with both sides. This particular foot has a 1/4 inch to either side, so that's really convenient. So let's say you have lots of half square triangles to make. Just go on ahead and grab your next stack, line them up nicely, make sure that the fabrics are right sides together and nicely lined up. And I just usually stagger them. I use the 1/4 inch on one side of the foot and then I use the 1/4 inch on the other side of the foot to just chain piece through all of them. Chain piecing is a really helpful technique. It helps you speed through your piecing really quickly and you don't have to break thread. So it's not only stopping you from breaking thread, it's wasting less bobbin thread. I know you love to wind your bobbin. So this is definitely going to save you some time. So now I'm going to stitch right back onto another scrap charger because this chain is complete. I've stitched through everything I want to stitch. I'm going to clip everything apart. It's just always good to have a little pair of scissors nearby for that. Now I'm going to take the pieces, flip them over, and whatever side that I stitched before, you can see here I stitched 1/4 inch to that side of the line. Now I'm going to stitch a 1/4 inch to the opposite side of the line. Just stitch on down. You want that 1/4 inch spacing because the next step is cutting these half square triangles apart so we can have our finished units. So now I'm just going to grab a pair of scissors and cut right along that middle marked line. If you're making lots and lots of half square triangles at once, you could also use a rotary cutter for this, but this works just fine if you only have a few to make. Okay, so now I'm going to finger press the seam allowance open. And this is a seam on the bias, on the diagonal, and that means it's just a little bit delicate. So take your time on this and don't be too rough with it. This is why I'm finger pressing it open first. I don't want to just try and take this and dig the tip of my iron into that and try and flatten it out with the iron. You really want to use your fingers to get this nice and flat first. Okay, that looks good. I'm going to grab my firm pressing board, and you can find another tutorial on how to make your own pressing board. It's very easy and it is so much better than using a regular ironing board from the store. This is so much firmer. It's going to stabilize your pieces, and I'm not worried at all about potentially stretching that bias seam because I have this nice firm pressing board. Okay, so there we go. And I am using a hot iron that's dry, doesn't have any water in it, and I have this set to the cotton setting, usually the highest setting on any iron. So that's what I mean when I say it's hot and dry, no water in it. So that's the setting I use on my iron, at least in my preference. So there we go, 2 half square triangles pieced. The last step is to trim these up so they're the right size for the pattern. So now I'm going to trim up this half square triangle, and the most important thing to do with this is always trim up one side at a time and always be holding your rotary cutter in your dominant hand. Now I'm going to take my ruler, line up the 45-degree line with the seam line through the center of the piece, and I want to leave myself just a little bit of space all the way around. This first cut, the first two cuts actually, are just trimming up and squaring up one side each. So all I'm lining up, all I'm looking at on the ruler is that 45-degree line. Now I'm left-handed, so that's how I'm going to cut. Left hand, the rotary cutter in my left hand, and push the cutter away from myself. Now I have one of these nice spinning mats. It just makes my life a little bit easier when I'm filming videos. So that's why I'm using, so that way I can rotate it around without having to touch the piece. And I can line my ruler up again. And now I'm lining up two things. I'm lining up that 45-degree line again. I'm also lining that cut edge that I just cut with the edge of the ruler. So I have two things to line up now. With every cut that we make, we have more things to line up, and that's just making sure that the finished unit that we create is nice and square. Okay, there we go. We've got two sides cut. Now what we're going to do is line up that 45-degree line again, and I'm making a 4.5 inch, a 4-inch finished or 4.5 inch cut half square triangle. So I am lining up the 4.5 inch mark with those two cut sides and the 45-degree line. So when you're trimming up, when you get to this stage, when you've cut off two sides, then at this stage you're squaring. You're making sure that that unit, that half square triangle, is nice and square to those lines on the ruler. Okay, so this looks good. Now I know it is really tempting when it gets to this stage to do a cross cut like this, and I did that and I really cut myself once. So instead, rotate it around. You can leave the ruler in the same place. You can press firmly and it'll rotate right around with it, and then you can make that last cut. But please don't take shortcuts. Rotary cutters are really sharp and they really will cut you. Okay, so that is how you make your half square triangles and trim them down to the proper size. I hope that you'll have a great time making lots of half square triangles for the Friendship Quilt Along. So that's it for this quilting tutorial. I hope you enjoyed learning how to make this awesome half square triangle unit. I love using these triangles in my quilts, and I've used a mess of them in the Friendship Quilt Along. This is a month-by-month quilt along where we're going to learn how to piece a block and then how to quilt it together, both on our home machine and on a long arm. If this sounds like something you'd be interested in joining, come and check it out at leahday.com/friendship. Until next time, let's go quilt.